Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Chats with Kat on the Voice of Adoptees podcast. I am your host, Kat, and I hope everyone is having a great week so far. Don't forget to grab your coffee, your tea, or a preferred beverage and settle on in. I'm currently here with Kat, who is an author and the creator of Self Academy. So, Kat, please introduce yourself for our audience. Just some basic things, your name, where you're currently living, and a fun fact. Give us a fun fact about yourself.
Oh, okay. So my name is Kat Lindquist. I currently reside in Oceanside, California. And a fun fact about myself, I won't go into detail, but I do have a famous sibling.
Oh,
So we'll just say that.
that's exciting.
But I won't reveal who here for, that person's, their anonymity.
I love that. That's really fun.
Yeah.
So, what is your connection to adoption? What's your story? Let's talk about that, where it started. Let's talk about your adoptive family and your biological family a little bit.
Excellent. So I am an adoptee, a domestic adoptee. I was born and raised in California, and I was born in 1969. So, it frames kind of the era and where adoptions were when I was adopted and the way that I was raised. I was raised where both my sibling and I knew that we were adopted. And I would say, a pretty typical upbringing of middle class America. So I had a lot of things that most kids would want. So I got to have a car at 16. I went to college. I played in the band. I had what was considered a pretty good life. And yet through all of that, there was this thread of knowing that I was adopted and the specific implications of what that meant for our family. And while we openly talked about being adopted, we never actually talked about adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And I never, even to this day, I still don't have a lot of details about how I was adopted. I have some. The one thing that I do credit my adoptive parents for is they did get information from the adoption agency regarding some health issues and some family background. So I had a little bit of information, which was instrumental in finding my biological family.
Okay, so you said you were born in 1969, and you're saying that it was a very open communication, but at the same time, it was very hidden. How did that make you feel at the time? What was that journey like for you?
I felt there was a disconnect. And I was very aware from the time I was young that there was this big disconnect in our family. And knowing that I wasn't related to my sibling and I wasn't related to my parents, it left this gap, this feeling of, well, none of us are related. And it was a strange feeling. I can't say it was necessarily a bad feeling. It was more just an uncomfortable feeling growing up. And one of the other things I was highly aware of, especially when I became a teenager, was that I recognized I was most likely a firstborn from my biological mother. And yet I was living in a second-born position in my family. And I was very keenly aware of the idea behind nature and nurture, the idea of firstborn qualities. What do firstborns have as emotional qualities, as leadership qualities? And I felt I exhibited a lot of those. And yet being in a second born position, I never felt I was honored for those. And that was a strange feeling as well. And then through my journey, I have reconnected with my biological family, and I'm the oldest of 6.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna talk about that. The way you phrased that, I really liked it, being the firstborn, but being in the second position within the family. I think that is a sentiment that other adoptees may be able to relate to. It's something we haven't really discussed. It's not really talked about.
Yeah.
And did you feel that there was a lot more pressure on you because of that? Was it pressure from your family or was it pressure from yourself in trying to figure out where you lay in the family?
It was more internal because I wanted to be recognized for the leadership qualities that I had, and I didn't feel that I was receiving that recognition.
Mm,
So there was a feeling of, well, and also being female in the second born position, it there was a dynamic within our family that because I was a girl, and my parents were very explicit about this, and I have very vivid memories of my adopted mother saying things like, well, there's a double standard in this house and you're going to live by it. And it's like, whoa. Like, I'm growing up in the 80s at a time where women's liberation was very strong, where women were becoming much more independent. And yet I felt like I was living in this very archaic time in the structure of my family. And that second born position, I felt had a structure to that didn't feel natural to me. I also knew that they had chosen to have a girl as the second child. So it was a choice. It wasn't just this is what happened in the family, but I was specifically chosen for this role. And that felt uncomfortable as well.
I have to think about that for a moment because everything that you're saying, it's very powerful. In what ways did you try to break the mold of being a woman in this position in your family?
Well, it was somewhat expected that we went to college.
Right.
That was the life that my parents wanted to send us. And I followed that path. However, I went into a field that my parents did not want me to go into. And that field was early childhood education, which I feel I really specifically went into because of my adoption and because of the trauma that I had experienced. Was I wanted to really understand how children develop and how what is the difference between a typical development and a non-typical development, and do my own healing and pathway through that experience. So I went into this profession and it just felt right. It felt that's where I was led to go. It was part of my nature. I really cared about children. I worked with children from the time I was young doing babysitting. And I was very, very drawn to this profession. And I was highly discouraged. And I just said, nope, I'm doing it anyway. I'm doing it anyway. I don't care what you say. This is what feels right. And I actually went on to make a good career out of it for a long time, 30 years or more. And I was highly successful in my career. And so I that was kind of, I guess, how I moved beyond that. And I moved into being the person that I knew I was meant to be at that point in time.
Yeah.
And so teaching and supporting people, being a leader, um, being in management, creating programs, those are all skills that I learned through early childhood education.
I love that because my mother was actually a elementary school teacher as well, and she displays much of the resilience, as I like to call it, as you.
Yeah.
So I have a
Yeah.
very
Thank you.
soft spot in my heart for that. So through your journey, what is one emotion that you still remember today? It sticks with you. What is that emotion for you?
There was a feeling of not belonging.
Mm,
And it kind of goes back to that feeling of, well, I'm not related to my sibling. I'm not related to my parents. So I don't belong here. And that was a very, very strong feeling for a long time. And it was a feeling I buried. I really did bury that. And yet it manifested itself in the choice of partner that I ended up having, which was also it was toxic and very abusive, and moving into that place of creating another experience in my life where I didn't belong.
Mm.
And this is, I'll get into a little bit more about what I do now and how that all ties together, but it really did come to this place of this is how I perceived myself, that I was someone that didn't belong. I was bullied a lot as a child. Nothing to do with adoption, which is very interesting. I know a lot of people get bullied because they're adopted. I was
Yeah.
bullied for other reasons, but feeling that I didn't belong in a lot of different places. And when you carry that story, whether you're conscious of it or not, it manifests itself as you grow older, because there's this internal belief, well, I don't belong anywhere, and I'm not worthy of being cared for. I'm not worthy of having someone treat me the way that I'm supposed to be treated. So you actually end up creating and seeking out people, circumstances, and relationships that tie into what you believe about yourself. And that's what I did.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there where it is it's an unconscious thing. We attract how we feel about ourselves, and sometimes we're just not aware of it. I do wanna ask you how I wanna ask you very briefly, because I would like to talk about it a little
Yes.
bit later as well. I believe this ties into your journey, but how did you get out of that mentality? Just very briefly. What helped you?
It came down to when I became a mother, and as I was in this highly toxic, abusive marriage with a child, you always think, okay, well, if I do this, it's going to get better. If I do that, it's going to get better. And it never does. It never
Mm,
does. And so having my own child, my own biological child, and recognizing that the environment that I was providing for my child was unhealthy and it was hurting both of us, that it was the catalyst to take me out. It took me 10 years to
mm,
get out.
yeah,
It was a long, long journey because I was so I it the internal narrative was so strong about not being worthy. It took me 10 years to build up enough of reading books and talking to people and being in enough pain that I said, "Okay, I'm done."
mm.
And that was the journey. It still took 2 years after that. So it really was about 12 years from the time that I started to the time I got out.
Yeah, I totally understand that journey. That journey is with me and myself, but I know a lot of us adoptees understand that, as well as a lot of humans in general. We
Mhm.
definitely understand that
Yes.
journey. So you mentioned that you're now a mother, but I wanna talk about your reunification process. Walk me through
Yeah.
it. Tell us all about it. What was that like for you?
So what's very interesting is I had a fleeting time when my child she was about 9,
Mhm.
and she was aware that I was adopted,
Oh,
and she got to, I mean, I was very upfront, but because it was very open in my family. So
yeah.
I had no problem telling my own child that I was adopted. And she came to this realization of, well, wait a minute. So if you're adopted and grandma and grandpa are not your real parents, then who is? And it was just that very innocent child question that kind of like, oh my gosh, it kind of hits that internal piece of what you've buried. And that was in 2009. And that started a small catalyst of, maybe I'll start to look. And back in '09, there wasn't a lot of ways to look. I wasn't at a place of doing a DNA test or going really that deep. So I just kind of let it be. And it was after I got divorced and I was 7 years into my self love journey where I found a coach that taught me how to do some massive transformational, amazing transformational work. And it was on one of my sessions with my coach that he took me through a process, and I didn't even know that there was something deep inside that I carried. And as we started talking through kind of what I'm working on, what I'm wanting to create, this piece came out that said, "You're a mistake and you should never have been born."
Mm.
And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea this feeling was inside me." So I voiced that to my coach. He's like, "Oh, we're going in deep today, huh?" And I said,
Right.
"I guess so. I guess so." So we went through the transformational process, and I'm crying and I'm just releasing all this stuff. And in the middle of it, now there's 100 people on the call, so it's not just an individual. He can't see us, he can't hear us, but he tuned in and he said, "Hey, everybody just wait. I'm going to take Kat through this." He took me on a journey to before I was born. He took
Mm.
me all the way back to my energetic state. And he said, "So from here, you chose to come into this life. Now, you may not have known what, all the circumstances were going to be, but you chose to come and you chose to be human regardless of whatever is coming along. And you also wanted life to be fun. And I think you forgot that. So this is a reminder that life is good, life is fun, and it's also what you create." And then he
Yeah.
brought me back through. And by the time he brought me back through it, it was gone. This huge weight had literally lifted off my chest. And that was 4 years ago. And it's never come back. And it was after that release that I said, "Oh, I'm ready to do the search."
Mhm.
And when I had done a DNA test and I had a few people that were not super close, like a first cousin, maybe a lot of second cousins, but I had these markers that I had mentioned earlier that I had received from my adoptive parents about my family structure. And it was a
Mm.
very specific family structure. So I had that as a guide. And as I started digging into the DNA and the family trees on Ancestry, it only took me 20 days and about 75 hours of being on Ancestry, and my biological mother showed up.
Wow. That's incredible.
It was incredible. But again, I believe that because of the transformational work, that it opened up the ability for me to release the the resistance and the stress. And one of the key pieces that I talk about with a lot of people is that in the time between that transformational experience and the time I started the DNA search, I did a lot of soul searching and I did a lot of questioning of, am I prepared for? And I've got actually a list of 10 different questions that are critical for an adoptee to ask themselves. Am I ready to find out if my birth was something traumatic? Was there something traumatic about my birth or my conception? What if my biological parents are dead? What if I start this process and they don't want to talk to me?
Yeah.
I went through all that preparation before I even started the DNA search. And because I had done all of that work, I went into it with this fun, light, "Hey, I'm just going to see what happens." And
Yeah.
no matter which pathway it goes, if they want to connect with me, great. If they don't want to connect with me, great. I am good here. That was so critical for me because then there was no pressure. There was no expectation that meeting my biological family was going to change me in any way. I'd already done the change. I'd already done the transformational work. It was more of a curiosity. It was more of a filling in some of the gaps than anything else. And so I reached out to her. I found her on Facebook and I reached out to her, and it took her 3 days to respond. That 3 days was like the most like, oh my gosh, is she not okay? Well, you know what? Remember, you're going into this. There's no expectation. If she doesn't respond, she doesn't respond. That's okay. And I just let it go. I stopped looking at Facebook. And then a few days later, I checked it and she had responded. And that was our journey. And that was 4 years ago.
That's a similar story to mine. I also found my biological family on Facebook, through Facebook. I was very grateful. But it sounds like to me what happened was you became strong within yourself. You had this certainty of, I know who I am. And you were able to move forward because, like you said, no matter what you discovered, it was not going to shake you and break you. People bend, they
That's
don't
right.
break, you know?
That's
and
right.
you had bent so much that you were able to strengthen yourself back up in the process. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to hear.
Yeah.
I'm really happy that it worked out so well for you. I can't imagine how excited and how happy you must have been. Yeah, so talk to me a little bit about that. Talk to me a little bit about how the aftermath of that, of reaching out and hearing back sort of thing. What was going through your mind?
Right. So I think the most important thing coming out of that was that there was an acknowledgement. There was the acknowledgement on the other side that I had a place that I belonged. Now, whether I connected more after that initial kind of, few exchanges, it didn't matter. And this was another piece that my coach really helped me understand is we belong to our DNA, to our biological family, whether we know who they are or not.
Mhm.
Their DNA runs in our veins, and is my body is their body. So whether I know who that person is or not, whether I ever meet them or not, whether I have a name or not, I belong to that tribe, to that biological thread of human existence, and no one and nothing can take that away from me. So again, it's this understanding, this different shift in your mindset that where I come from is not just who I am. That's part of the flesh and blood of who I am. But there's a whole other side energetically of who I am too. So as I'm doing this research of finding out who I am physically, what I had done in that 7 years prior to doing this was finding myself energetically, spiritually, finding the essence of who I am as a person aside from my biology. And that is a journey that I feel a lot of kept people, they go on this journey, but they start with the basis of I know who I am physically. And for adoptees, going on this part of the journey feels very scary because they don't have a grounding of who they are physically. And what I want to help people do is to flip the script. Find yourself energetically, find yourself spiritually first. And that will help prepare you for your physical, biological experience. Because at that point, you're grounded. Like you said, I'm grounded. I know who I am. I love who I am. And whatever circumstances of meeting or not meeting or connecting or not connecting with the biological family, that's that's almost irrelevant. It's
Mm.
great, and it was exciting, and it did help me fill in some gaps, but I could have been okay moving forward without it. And as I continued to have some messaging with my biological mother, one of the things and I think it's because I came to it from this very grounded place about knowing who I am. I told her in the beginning, I said, look, I understand, this is a big deal for both of us. And I knew that I had, 101 questions that I wanted to ask. I waited 3.5 years to meet her face to face to ask those burning questions, because it was important to me that she and I build a relationship in the present as two adults and figure out how we were going to connect, if we were going to connect, and what that looked like over time
Yeah.
before I jumped into the experience that was our trauma. And again, I feel like there's a lot of adoptees who they want the answers because they're hurting inside. There's this pain, this gap, this disconnect. And the idea of this biological person coming in is going to complete all of that. And
Yeah.
so many times people will jump in and start asking questions about their origin story, their conception story, their biological lineage and grandparents and where are you from and all that. And all of that is very triggering for the other side as well. So I waited. I'm a very patient person. I'm a very patient person. And
Yeah.
I waited and I built that relationship with her because I knew that when the time came and when we did meet face to face, it was going to be something significant and special. And it was. It was
Yeah.
amazing. And it was in that meeting, we've only met once at this point, just for a lot of different reasons. It took us to another level, and it allowed us to start talking about the adoption
Yeah.
and to talk about it from a place where she had taken time to process her grief, her trauma, her mindset of, oh my gosh, this child that I let go of 50 plus years ago is now back in my life. I always had that dream, that thought, like, is she okay? Is she out there? What's going on? And now literally she's like right here.
Right.
And so allowing time for not only yourself as the adoptee to process your emotions, to process what may be happening, and to give yourself some space in that connecting process. But understand there's a lot of trauma on the other side too. There's a
Yeah.
lot of trauma on the other side that they need time to process. They need time to go through. And maybe they're not ready. Maybe their timeline is going to be different than yours. They gave up a lot. And I feel like for a lot of adoptive mothers in particular, especially in my era, they were told, well, just forget that you basically gave birth to a child. Just forget it. Just
Yeah.
move on. And I'm sure a lot of, not just in my era, but, you know, especially in my era,
Yeah.
there was a lot of that.
I get that.
So,
My
yeah.
my adoptive mom was born in 1950, and I know she shares that sentiment. You basically were born from me in a way, right? They just welcomed me with open arms. The
Right.
way you just laid all of this out, I'm in awe because it's very articulate, it's very well thought out. It's very much my journey as well in the same steps, and it's nice to hear that it's also helped another fellow adoptee. So, it's really great, and on that, I'd like to basically know what was the catalyst that moved you out of the fog, and was it a purposeful thing? Did this journey that of knowing yourself, being secure in yourself, being gracious to the other side, because many adoptees are not necessarily thinking of the biological parent and the biological family. Did that help you?
Absolutely. I feel a lot of my coming out of the fog was the 7-year journey that I took before even approaching my biological journey.
Mm,
There was I when I started when I divorced and I started on my personal development journey, finding Cat, it really had nothing to do with my adoption. It was truly just, I want to find out who I am.
yeah.
I went from living with my adoptive parents. I met my late ex-husband at 19. We got married 5 years later. We were together from the ages of 19 to 44. And in that time, I completely lost who I was.
Yeah.
So there was a journey that I had to come to figure out some level of who I am. And that took me 7 years. And then finding my coach who elevated me to that place where then I could start my adoption journey. And it really wasn't, like I said, it wasn't even on my radar specifically as I was creating who I wanted to be. I didn't realize how much of all of my life experience had to do with the adoption trauma.
Yeah.
But by the time I got to that place, I had 7 years of self development and finding myself and loving myself to the point where it was like, oh, okay, I got this. It wasn't, it was a very gradual coming out because it wasn't even on the radar.
Mm,
It was a different journey than I think a lot of adoptees feel.
yeah.
Um, and and so it's very interesting because I just finished a blog series in April on coming out of the fog, and looking back across my journey, I could see the elements of coming out of the fog, but I had none of that language.
Right.
I didn't know that, just finding myself, loving myself, letting, kind of coming out of fear, obligation, and guilt. That was my journey out of abuse.
Right.
That was my journey out of domestic violence and narcissistic abuse that I've lived most of my life. So in essence, as a survivor of that and an adoption survivor, it's like all of that's kind of brought in together. That coming out of the fog, again, it wasn't about language. I didn't have the language of it. It just was part of my natural process.
Oh, I love that. So, how did you begin your self-love and self-discovery journey? You talked a little bit about the resources that you used, but what people besides your coach were instrumental to move you forward? Was there anybody else? I think during that time, it's important to have a very strong support group. So, who else did you bring along your journey?
So, over time, I've had a series of friends.
Yeah.
I think that as we move in different circles, I've always been someone to make at least one or two very deep connections with people. And so I've had along my journey women who have been very, very instrumental, who have been soul sisters across time and space that had been there for me. Some of those soul sisters are still in my life today. Some of them are not. just through different circumstances. I also started, when I started my journey, I really started with affirmations, and it really was a journey of moving moving out of negativity. So
Yeah.
when I got divorced, I stopped watching the news. I stopped reading horror stories. I stopped watching movies that had a lot of violence. I really went on a complete shift and found a lot of affirmations. I was doing a lot of positive music. I was doing a lot of self-help type people. I read a lot of books. And a majority of them, again, they had nothing to do with adoption, but they had all to do with self-love, coming into your own. I did a lot of metaphysical work. So coming into understanding metaphysics, law of attraction, things like that, just deeply resonated with me. So I found a lot of books and teachers that I would listen to videos, podcasts, read their books, watch their YouTube videos. Those really were the biggest catalyst to make my shift, along with moving away from media and elements that created negativity. And that's one thing I tell a lot of my clients is it's the first thing I ask them to do is to please stop watching the news.
Yeah.
Please stop watching any form of news. I guarantee if there's something that's happening in the world, you will hear about it on some social media platform, but do not go searching and just have CNN or whatever it is on the TV in the background. Don't just turn it off and replace that with listening to affirmations, listening to positive music, finding those things to fill your bucket, because we have to fill our own buckets in the beginning.
Yeah.
And whatever you fill it with is what comes out. So that beginning, for me, it was really about affirmations, and that's what took me, I'd say, for the first 3 or 4 years in my journey, was doing a lot of affirmation work, and it was highly successful.
That's cool. So you're an author and you've written a workbook, and I'd like for you to talk about it. It's called the Adoptee Self-Love Workbook. Please talk about it a little bit
Yeah.
and how it's helped you and how it can help others.
So the Adoptee Self-Love Workbook that I created really is an homage to the beginning of my journey. And because I've been on my journey for a long time and I've grown so much across my experience, I wanted to be able to take my experience, to take the wisdom that I've learned, and to bring it into a way that I could start helping other people. And as I've been looking across the last 2 years of how am I going to support other adoptees? How am I going to help them in their journey along creating that self-love and be able to come to that place of being grounded and fully into that self that is so important for anybody to be in, but especially for adoptees. And I had to think back to where I began my journey. So
Yeah.
I was so glad that you asked me about that, because that's really the impetus of this book. Is it's a series of 52 affirmations, so one affirmation per week, and there's exercises, there's journal prompts, there's meditations, things for you to think about to utilize that specific affirmation for that specific week. And I also wanted to make sure that the book was accessible in such a way that it didn't feel like work,
Yeah.
that it was a way to express the connection that you have as a spiritual being having a human experience, I go briefly into the universe, the law of attraction, different metaphysical laws, and then how what we think about, our thoughts, feelings, and actions, when those are aligned, this is what creates our reality. So I actually have a quote that says, "Where focus goes, energy flows, and where energy flows, reality grows." So I've broken that down into a formula. It's focus plus energy equals reality. So as you go through the book and you keep that formula in mind, if on a given day you don't do your affirmation, that's okay. If, within a week you do it 3 times, that's 3 more times than you've done it before. There's no pressure, there's no expectation. This is your journey. This is a guide so that you can create your journey your way, but to have some level of structure of someone who's been there before. And so that was really what prompted me to write this. It's self-published. So it doesn't look super fancy, but all the information's in there. And I encourage you to get a really nice journal, something that you want to write in. And handwriting is the best way to do it because there is connection between the brain and the hand and the thought processes that go through how we handwrite as opposed to typing or recording. So I do encourage handwritten responses in your journals because it is a deeper level of processing for you.
I think that's a very useful tool and a very needed tool for the adopted community in order to help
Thank you.
growth and healing. And I definitely recommend that everybody does check out this workbook. I know I definitely will. So, describe a little bit your perspective and processes of addressing adoption trauma, how that's different from traditional methodologies. You're saying a lot of things that I very much personally resonate with. And I would really love to hear your perspective on this.
So my my approach to helping an adoptee move beyond adoption is to understand that whatever our circumstances of life are, they the adoption and those circumstances are in the past. And while their implications certainly flow forward, the trauma is something that was in the past. And I've done some research on trauma and understanding trauma to a certain level of trauma is something that happens within us when we have an experience that hurts us.
Yeah.
So we have this experience that has hurt us, but then we internalize the process. And because most, not all, but many people who are adopted, this trauma happens pre-verbal. So we don't have language to even articulate the trauma because it was a pre-verbal trauma. And in being pre-verbal and also being in a subconscious state, we're in a subconscious state up until between the ages of 5 and 7. So as we're growing, when we look at very young children, they're in a very carefree, open-minded state because their consciousness hasn't quite solidified and developed yet to the point where we have that very conscious mind, that sense of who I am isn't fully developed yet. So when we have traumas that happen during that time period of our lives, it is an unconscious or subconscious trauma that happens. So in the methodology that I've been trained in, what we do is we there's 3 main levels of consciousness. So we have the self-conscious, which is what is happening here. We have that unconscious, which is that underlying, it's running the show. It has all the patterns, all the habits, all the pain that it's holding on to. And that's what creates our reality. Then we have what's called the superconscious. The superconscious is the field of information and the higher self that is that energetic part of who we are. And when we tap into that part of who we are, there is no judgment, there is no emotion, even. So your superconscious would look at you and say, "Oh, you broke your leg. That's interesting." And your subconscious is going, "Oh my gosh, this trauma." And your body's going, "Oh, this hurts." But your superconscious just sees it as an experience. It doesn't have any judgment, whether it's pain, whether it's pleasure, whether it's good, whether it's bad. It has none of that. So instead of trying to address our trauma from the conscious part of us, which wants to control everything, our subconscious part, which is what's holding on to that trauma because it feels safe and it doesn't want to let go, we go to the superconscious level. So there are specific processes, language, things that I can do with clients where I walk them through these particular processes. We have a methodology that takes you from point A to point B. But the biggest piece behind this is not about healing. This is not about fixing. This is not about actually addressing the trauma. This is about choosing to create the life that you want to create. So it's a big paradigm shift. It's a big mindset shift of, I'm not here to actually fix your trauma because, number one, I don't feel you're broken. I don't feel adoption broke you. And you don't need to be fixed or healed. You had a set of circumstances that caused trauma and pain that also created safety mechanisms and patterns that you're now living through and from.
Yeah.
So, in order for us to move beyond that, we have to be able to look beyond that and say, what is it I want to create? Who do I want to become? How do I want to live my life? Because, as I said, focus plus energy equals reality.
Yeah.
So if you're focusing on the trauma, you're focusing on the pain, if you're focused even on healing, if you're focused on healing, you're focused on the pain and the trauma because you're trying to heal the pain and the trauma. Instead of bypassing that and saying, who do I want to be? What do I want to create? So for me, I say, I want to create a life that feels easy, that feels grounded, where I have loving people around me, where I have financial abundance, where I have a healthy body. And this is what I want to create. Now, the circumstances of life are still going to come through, but the way that I address those is the mindset rather than looking at circumstances and saying, I don't want that circumstance, so I have to get rid of it. I have to fix it. I have to heal it. I have to change it. No, we want to create. We become powerful creators because that's what we were born to be. We're a powerful creator, and I'm going to create the life I want. Now, these things are here. I still have to let them go. So as I described to you on that call with my coach, that piece, I was a mistake and I should never have been born, that was part of my trauma. I was holding on to that, didn't know it. In the process, I was focused on creating something else. That came up as the barrier to creating what I wanted to create. So what we do at the superconscious level is we tell the superconscious, hey, do you see this piece? We see this pain. We see this experience. This is stopping us from creating. Let's shift that. Let's remove that. Let's let it go. We're going to let go of the pain because we can't forget what happened. We can only let go of how we feel about it.
Yeah.
So we let go of the pain, and then that experience turns to wisdom.
Again, I really resonate so deeply because that's actually the journey that I'm on right now with those questions of who do I want to be? Where am I at in my life? Now I'm on my own. It's just me. My adoptive parents are both passed. So now I have the freedom to really ask myself those questions. And it's difficult at times. I think
Yeah.
you articulate it so beautifully, because everything you're saying, I'm going through it. I relate to it. I know exactly what you're
Beautiful.
talking about when you say it. And it's very comforting to me in a way. I do want to ask you, what are your intentions moving forward in your journey?
In my journey. So I have created Self Academy. Self Academy is the piece that houses what I'm calling my movement, which is called Moving Beyond Adoption.
Mm,
And I really want to help people to move beyond adoption in a way where they can live from peace, love, and alignment. It doesn't mean that adoption isn't, you're never going to forget that you're adopted. You're never going to forget the experiences that you've had, but it's time to be able to release the pain of the adoption and to step into being that powerful creator that you were born to be, and move from today, taking responsibility for where you are today
mm,
and moving forward in your journey. I'm not responsible for the choices that the adults made for me back when I was a baby. I am responsible for how I choose to engage with that, how I choose to view that, how I choose to feel about that. Those are my choices that I have now. And I have the choice now to choose, where do I want to go? Who do I want to be? Who do I want to become? And how am I going to take my experience of being adopted and integrate the wisdom from that experience into wherever I'm going next? And that's my vision, is to guide people along that journey. And so I've created Moving Beyond Adoption. It started with this book. So this was the first iteration. I published this in February of 2024. And I'm creating a group and individual coaching program around the book and the concept of the adoptee self-love workshop and program, so that I can help people get the structure that they need to go on this journey. It's not a matter of me telling you who to become or what to do or how to live your life. It's about providing a structure and a process that can help you release the things that are holding you back from becoming that powerful creator. And that's where I'm headed next, is creating this process and this program and this support for adoptees in our community so that they can move beyond adoption. Because I see so many people stuck,
yeah.
and I know what it feels like to be stuck.
I think it's such a beautiful sentiment. At the end of the day, something I always tell myself is, because I'm also Kat, so I say, Kat, keep moving forward, right? And at the end
Yeah,
of the day, that's all we adoptees can do.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
I would like to thank everyone for joining me on this episode of Chats with Kat. A very, very special thank you to our guest. Thank you so much for being here. Stay tuned for another episode every other Wednesday on the Voice of Adoptees podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, rate, and share this episode so that Kat's voice can be heard. Be sure to also check out our Patreon page to receive exclusive membership perks and leave us feedback on our episodes. And always, always remember, someone somewhere is thinking of you. You are not alone.